Imagine the most sacred bond in human nature, the instinct of a mother to protect, to nurture, and to sustain life. Now imagine that bond being hollowed out, not by a lack of love, but by a pathological need for power. In the 1980s, a woman named Tanya Reid convinced the world her children were dying, turning the medical profession into her personal stage. Fast forward 40 years and we are seeing a digital mirror of that same void in the case of Laura Owens. The headlines call them liars. The courts call them defendants. But as a clinician, I see something far more complex. I see a specific rare and chilling architecture of the human mind, the maternal lie. Today we're going beyond the what and we're going into the clinical why. I'm comparing the analog deception of the past with the digital manipulation of the present to find the red flags that everyone missed. I'm John Cordray and I'm a licensed professional counselor. For over 2 decades, I've sat across from the human psyche in the most fractured states. My goal on this channel is to provide you with the clinical file perspective, moving past sensationalism and into the actual psychological indicators that drive these high-profile cases. If you want to understand the why behind the world's most complex behaviors, you come to the right place. To understand where we are now, we have to look at where this pattern was first codified. Let's go back to 1984. Tanya Reid. On the surface, she was a super mom. She was the woman who lived in the hospital waiting rooms, who knew the names of every nurse, and who spoke the language of the ICU because she was a nurse herself. But underneath that exterior, Tanya was operating from a place of malignant attention-seeking. In clinical terms, this was a classic presentation of what we then called Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now known as fictitious disorder imposed on another. But here's a psychological indicator that most people miss. The goal isn't the sickness itself. The goal is the secondary gain. Tanya represents the analog era of deception. For Tanya, the drug wasn't money. It was the status of being the hero, the grieving mother. When a doctor praised her for her strength, it filled her pathological void in her identity. To pull this off, she had to physically induce symptoms. She had to doctor shop by traveling to different counties to avoid linked medical records. Her deception required a high level of physical commitment and a total lack of effective empathy, the ability to actually feel the pain of the child she was harming. As a clinician, when I look at Tanya Reid's case files, I see a person who viewed her children not as human beings with autonomy, but as extensions of her own ego. This is a critical psychological indicator. When a person can't distinguish where they end and another person begins, they feel entitled to use that person as a prop in their own life's drama. Tanya needed to be the one who knew. She needed to be the person the experts relied on for information. This leads us to our first major clinical overlap with the modern cases we see today, the need for omnipotence. In Tanya's mind, she was smarter than the doctors. She was playing God with the medical system. And as we transition from the 1980s into the digital age, we see this exact same God complex migrate from the hospital room to the legal system. The tools changed, but the void, that desperate, hollow need to be the center of a tragic narrative, remains identical. Now let's cross the bridge into the present day. If Tanya Reid was the architect of the analog deception, Laura Owens represents the move into the digital frontier. In 1984, the maternal lie required physical proximity and biological tampering. But in 2024, the maternal lie can be constructed entirely out of pixels, PDFs, and social media posts. As we look at the Laura Owens case, we aren't just looking at a woman who lied about being pregnant with twins. We are looking at what I call digital malingering. In clinical terms, malingering is an intentional production of false or grossly exaggerated physical or psychological symptoms motivated by external incentives. But with Owens, the incentive shifted from the adoration that Tanya Reid sought to a form of legal and social coercion. Watch the footage of Laura Owens or read the transcripts of her legal battles. You see a hallmark psychological trait, Pseudological Fantastica. This isn't your average white lie, or even a big lie. This is a pathological lying where the stories are often complex, long-lasting, and this is the key, the person begins to live within the fantasy. In my practice, I've seen how individuals with this trait don't just tell a lie, they build an ecosystem. For Laura Owens, this ecosystem included ultrasound photos, proof of medical appointments, and an entire narrative of high-risk pregnancy. Just as Tanya Reid used medical journals to fool doctors, Laura Owens used the digital tools of our era to attempt to fool the courts and her target. This is where the comparison gets chilling. Tanya Reid wanted your tears. She wanted you to say, "How do you do it, Tanya? You're such a strong mother." Laura Owens, based on the public record and clinical observation, appears to have wanted leverage. In the digital age, the maternal lie was weaponized as a tool of interpersonal control. By claiming pregnancy, she wasn't just seeking attention. She was seeking a permanent biological tether to her target. From a psychological standpoint, this is an extreme form of attachment pathology. It's the idea that if I can't have you through a healthy relationship, I will have you through a biological crisis. Remember how we discussed Tanya Reid's need for omnipotence, her need to be smarter than the doctors? We see our direct evolution of this in the Owens case as well. When she stood in the courtroom, or when she produced evidence that she was later scrutinized and debunked by digital forensic, she wasn't just lying. She was testing her power to bend reality. This is a clinical red flag known as reality testing impairment. It's not that she doesn't know the truth. It's that she believes her will is strong enough to make the lie become the truth. In the 80s, you couldn't easily fake a sonogram, but today you can find one in seconds on the internet. The ease of the digital lie has lowered the barrier to entry for these pathological behaviors, but it also has increased the high the deceiver feels when they think they've successfully manipulated a global audience. One of the most striking overlaps between Tanya Reid and the modern profiles like Laura Owens is the total absence of shame. When Tanya was caught, she didn't collapse in guilt for what she did to her children. She collapsed because her stage was taken away. When we look at the patterns in the Owens case, the continued insistence on the narrative despite mounting forensic evidence, we see that same lack of reflective functioning. This is the clinical ability to look at one's own behavior and understand its impact on others. Instead of remorse, we see doubling down. This is the defense mechanism used by those with high levels of narcissistic injury. To admit the lie would be a psychological death, so the mind chooses to fight reality until the very end. As we bring these two timelines together, the analog horror of Tanya Reid and the digital complexity of Laura Owens, we have to ask the most important clinical question. What's the diagnostic DNA that allows a person to lie about the very essence of life? To answer that, we have to look at the triad of pathological deception. This is a framework I've developed to help us understand these high-functioning, high-stakes deceivers. Both Reid and Owens utilize what I call a biological shield. In our society, and rightly so, we have a deep-seated bias to trust a mother's word. We are biologically hardwired to protect the pregnant woman and the nurturing parent. If a child is having a seizure, you don't ask if the mother is lying. You save the child. Laura Owens used this to bypass social and legal barriers. If a woman says she's pregnant, the immediate cultural response is support, not a demand for a forensic audit of her ultrasound. These individuals are experts at exploiting societal empathy. They take our best human traits, our compassion and our protective instincts, and turn them into a blind spot where their deception can grow. The second triad is the hero-victim oscillating identity. In my years as an LPC, I've observed that pathological deceivers rarely choose one role. They oscillate. Tanya Reid was the hero when she was saving her children, and the victim when the mysterious illness baffled the experts. In the modern case of Laura Owens, we see a similar oscillation. She presents as a victim of her circumstances, her partners, or the system, while simultaneously positioning herself as a heroic figure, fighting for her rights and her truth. This oscillation serves as a clinical purpose. It creates a cognitive dissonance in the observer. You find yourself thinking, she can't be a liar. Look at how much she's suffering. Or she can't be a liar. Look at how hard she's fighting. By keeping the audience and the targets in a state of confusion, the deceiver maintains control of the narrative. The third and last trait is a vindictive turn. It's a narcissistic rage. This is perhaps the most dangerous psychological indicator. What happens when the lie is challenged? When the clinician questioned Tanya Reid, she didn't just disagree. She moved. She split that doctor into the enemy category and sought a new audience. In the case of Laura Owens, when the narrative was questioned, we saw the deployment of a legal system as a weapon. This is narcissistic rage channeled through a professional lens. For the pathological deceiver, the person who sees the truth isn't just a skeptic. They are, in fact, an existential threat. Because their entire identity is built upon a lie, anyone who pulls a single thread is threatening to unravel the entire self. This is why the maternal lie often ends in litigation or tragedy. The deceiver will burn the bridge before they allow anyone to see that there was never a bridge there to begin with. I want to leave you with a clinical checklist. Whether you are following a headline or dealing with a high conflict individual in your own life, look for these 3 markers. Marker A, inconsistency in the details, consistency in the emotion. The facts of the story might shift, the dates of the ultrasound, the name of the doctor, but the emotional intensity never wavers. They are always the victim or always the hero. Marker B, the overprotection of evidence. Healthy people don't usually walk around with a folder of proof or basic life facts. When someone provides too much documentation for something that should be simple, it's often a sign of a compensatory over-reporting. Marker C, the lack of shared reality. Does their story only work if someone else is wrong, incompetent, or out to get them? If the narrative requires a conspiracy of silence from doctors, lawyers, and even ex-partners, you're likely looking at a pathology. Tanya Reid and Laura Owens are separated by decades in technology, but they're joined by the same fractured psyche. They represent a warning that most dangerous deceptions are not the ones that sound like a movie, but the ones that sound like a mother. As we continue to navigate a world where digital truth can be manufactured in an instant, our best defense is clinical literacy. We have to understand the why so we can protect ourselves and the people we love from the what. So what did you think about my comparison? Looking at these 2 cases side by side, do you see the evolution of the lie? Or do you think the core pathology has stayed exactly the same? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen my comparison of Ted Bundy and Brian Kohlberger, I highly recommend it as your next clinical file. It shows another side-by-side of how these relationship dynamics can turn clinical. I'm John Cordray, and until next time, good day and good night.